Okay, let's take a look at Worthington's turning points. First thing I want to note has to do with components, which are pretty crappy in most part, except for the counters. The counters are very nicely done. The rule book is a glossy rule book. I put it down on my table. I don't know, there may have been a little dampness there. Well, some of the rule book disappeared and it's on my table now. I can see the words there. It doesn't feel like there's anything sticky here. Just a little bit of dampness. When you get to glossy rules, recent paper quality, that stuff sticks to anything. It comes off of the backing of the paper. It sucks for that. It sucks for another thing, which is that you can't, and I've said this again and again, you can't make corrections to it unless you have a goddamn script, though, to do them with. And then, if your correction was mistaken, or if your little notes to yourself are something that don't pertain anymore, you can't just erase them. That's really problematic in my book. On top of that, well, we got these player aid cards, which are okay. They're a little flimsy, but you know, whatever. The actual playing card's fairly sturdy. Nasty sharp corners, though, and because of the sharp corners, they tend to get damaged pretty easily. So you're going to have to sleeve them, both to prevent paper cuts because they do hurt. And then you got a damn cardboard board, which is just a terrible design, but Worthington seems to specialize in it. On the other hand, the counters are well done. Unlike some other games that Worthington puts out there, I'm unaware of any errata for them, so I don't have to mark up my pretty counters with anything. Okay, this is a game, though, that kind of disappoints on all levels. Except maybe one, and that one may be very valuable to you. Okay, so first of all, as a simulation, my gut, whoops, is that it's almost a complete failure. I can't be absolutely certain, though, and here's why. The play of the cards... The game is so dependent on the play of the cards that... I'm trying to keep my pipe lit. I got complaints on how many times I light it, so now I'm going to be puffing all the time. The play of the cards is so vital to how you get anything done in the game, and is so dependent on what the players bring to their concept of how they're going to handle things, that... It is possible that the best tactics in the game involve playing the cards and using your pieces in a manner which is consistent with reality. The problem is, it is also quite possible, at least for two people who don't know what they're doing, or one person playing both sides, to get completely ahistorical looking results. I had some of those going on in my game, there's no question of that. Especially when you've got forces kind of in a meeting engagement like Freeman Farm is. I didn't want to do Lundy's Lane. I've had enough of this. I had to bail on Freeman's Farm, although it was pretty clear who had won at that point. Is it so terrible that it's not much of that there's almost no simulation value to this? I mean, Richard Berg points out in the introduction or somewhere, maybe in his designer's notes, this is meant to be more a game than a simulation. Great. Okay. That's fair enough. If Milton Bradley was publishing it, I would say, hey, bonus. But Worthington's supposed to be a wargame publisher. I get kind of that feeling whenever I'm facing a wargame publisher's games, is that I expect something more from them than I would expect from, say, I don't know what, an unknown publisher. Or a known kind of family game or Ameritrash or something like that publisher, where I would look at it and say, well, you know, what the hell did you expect? You bought a Milton Bradley game, right? The other big failure for this is the rules themselves. They are ambiguous, incomplete, going back to the components, but this affects the rules. The print on the cards is itsy bitsy typeface that my eyes, I'm like, whoa, I can barely see this. You know, and a lot of us are older now, and it's getting harder to deal with something like, you know, small print. Okay, sure, I've got my reading glasses, but I shouldn't need them with my regular glasses on. But that's beginning to show, hey, I'm about ready for bifocals, I guess. And even though I don't need my reading glasses for anything else, if I have to read, you know, 3-point font, yeah. Okay. So where the rules really show, you know, so many points are just not fleshed out completely. Things where you kind of have to make it up on the fly and figure it out. There may be fact, there may be people who've, you know, worked this through who can help you over on Consim World or wherever it is they play non-war games like this. But yeah, it's, you know, it's simply, it looks like it was thrown over the wall. In fact, kind of my feeling with this is maybe Berg had a great idea, did about 8 hours of work designing the game, and much of that work had to go into making these cards. Each battle has its own individual cards to kind of reflect the amount of command control type, you know, the amount of command that each side had over its troops, how much movement it can get, how effective the troops are in terms of the battle points, and what kind of specific events they want to give to each player in it. So, unlike something like Combat Commander, for a CDG, and this is definitely a CDG, it's able to, you would think, create a very believable historical background, you know, with that kind of, hey, every battle has its own deck of cards, it has its own events baked into it, it has its own values in it that'll reflect the command and the leadership values and all kind and troop quality and all kind of other things in it. There's something very weird though about the play of the game, and it ends up with this kind of, you know, bluffing and hidden commitment type game, where when you actually enter into a battle, both sides slap down a number of cards or whatever and reveal them, and that gets added to the combat value, and basically you have to beat the other guy, and you want to beat him by a lot, pretty much 2-to-1 if you can manage it. So that's kind of a clever way to play the game, but or a clever game design conceit there, but the problem is that it's so unconstrained. So the phasing player is limited to the number of cards he can play over his turn, which includes during battle. He can only use up 5 cards over his turn. Whereas the defending player could, you know, do a massive counterattack and maul the attacking forces by playing a lot of cards. But it's not quite sure, in my mind at least, what the hell that's supposed to mean. I mean, if I use up all my firepower on one segment of my line, what the hell does that mean? It's not like this is support fire or something coming into play. It's just, oh yeah, all the lucky shots were over on that side of the table. What? I don't get that at all. And again, like I said, it does not have that simulation quality. What it does have is bluffing games are kind of fun. Okay? A lot of people really like that. And I think the core of this game would be kind of fun. Fun in the way that a Wings of War is fun. Fun in a way that some of those Milton Bradley American Heritage System games are fun, not the later Battlemaster crap. But, you know, things like Broadsides, where it's all about, you know, this kind of pure strategy, but then there's a couple of hidden pieces on the board that you have to maneuver with. Or Dogfight, where you have a hand of cards like this and you're trying to maneuver with them. And it's, or even Battle Cry, which
has real problems, maybe worse than this. But it seems to me like this is on that kind of level. It's, hey, let's play a tactical game on that level. And I think that puts it far below certain games that I haven't experienced yet that I probably should. I haven't looked much into the modern entry-level war game-ish stuff. I don't know whether it is a war game or not. Things like Memoir. Command and Colors, I'm told, is, and I've seen enough of that played that I kind of feel like it is, but I hear people say Memoir's lighter to the degree where it is, and I don't know. This feels no more interesting to play than those, yet it has some significant flaws, and I don't know how interesting they are to play. So it's hard to tell, but you get the feeling those are very popular games because they're fun to play. But they also, I don't hear a lot of complaints, say, about Command and Colors Napoleonics, that it's just crap, Whereas this really gives that feeling that there's just nothing there to the historical aspect. And then when you take that away and say, okay, what if it's this really simple, competitive, not really a war game, but a war-themed game? How about then? How good is it for that? And the rule book gets in the way for that. A very short rule book, very incomplete one, leaving key concepts unspoken. More than that, I did bring this point up. These cards can be used for 3 uses. This is not a good intro to like the CDG style games. You've got your event, you've got your movement points, and you got your combat value. So you've got a whole bunch of different things you can do with your cards and a big hand of cards that you can manipulate. And then you've also got this kind of pulsing where maybe you want to play one card and then, okay, that's enough, or not play a card and just pass and let the other guy play if he wants. Or maybe you want to play all 5 of your cards. And you can kind of decide on the fly, depending on how well you do in your battles, etc., how many more cards you're going to have available. Well, that kind of complexity of decision-making seems way higher than what I'd expect from an entry-level game of any kind. But there is one type of player that I could see taking this as an entry-level game. It's a wargaming. Even if this isn't actually a war game because it's got almost no simulation value. But that would be the very heavy Euro player who likes being faced with a huge assortment of choices all at once, and then can try to figure out the puzzle that works, to resolve the situation they're in. I think that kind of player would particularly enjoy this if it were a more solid system. Now, this is not the only game in the system. Maybe some of the others are more complete. Maybe, I don't know where this fits in the system. My feeling was, given the incompleteness of the rules, given the failure as a simulation, I kind of pictured Berg thinking this idea up, spending a few hours designing the game, maybe a day or two, and kind of threw it at them saying, I think this is really cool, but I'm not really willing to work on it anymore because there is nothing really more to study about it in terms of a simulation. And somehow it getting published without the appropriate development work. With the, hey, we got famous designer's name on it, let's put this out. But it is part of a series, and I can't see, it's very hard for me to see this being the first game of the series and more coming out. And it's also hard for me to see this being a later game of the series and being so half-assed, not in terms of the historical aspect, but in terms of the rule book. How did it turn into, if there was already a system in place that mostly covered this, couldn't you just kind of boilerplate most of that on and then make some changes to that? And that's really hard to tell. But yeah, I think my wife and I are going to play this probably, and my guess is she's going to get a pretty good kick out of it. I'm going to be agonizing and miserable because of the amount of choice involved in the game, in terms of, you know, trying to set things up so that they operate tactically in a coherent fashion, if not a historically accurate one. So yeah, I've rated this fairly poorly, but it definitely gets some boost in terms of a projected fun value. As a solitaire game, this is a total loss. It was horrible to play solitaire, and I knew that from the rules. The rules have a solitaire system in it, which is basically, let's make this game totally pointless, and you're just kind of drawing cards off the top and doing things based on those. I can't see that working at all. The only way that you can add any sort of reason to the game is through the play of the cards being very cleverly done. And once they start getting randomized, you kill the two things that might be there. One, there might be a historical accuracy hiding in the optimal play of those cards. I mean, look, I couldn't figure out musket and pike for a long time in terms of how to make my units work. Now, that's a much more complex game, but this has very complex decisions in it. And once I started forming a linear formation, the game worked a little bit better until the center cracked, and that didn't mean that the guy who cracked was necessarily in terrible shape, because it started feeling like a Saladin type maneuver where, you know, the center retreats and then everything around it slams into the good units that went pursuing it. No, that's not this era, folks. It just did not feel at all like I was playing maybe it works in Chainmail, which I hear is, you know, another game in the system. Maybe it works fine there. It does not make a damn bit of sense in the linear combat era, even in the colonies where, you know, you have the terrain and more broken formations. And then the other thing it gets rid of to play that way is, well, the only really cool thing about this game, in my opinion, seems to be this decision making around the cards. And if you start randomizing the cards, you're no longer making decisions around them. You're just, I don't know, playing a game of, I'm going to say Canfield, you know, trying to figure out the best thing you can do with this thing. What the hell? So yeah, I don't see solo as a real option in it. They put solo rules in it because it's not a solo playable game, and well, it's hard to sell Wargamers games that can't be played solo, but this one shouldn't be. It's probably worse under those rules than trying to play the cards with a split personality or something. So pretty much a fairly heavy disappointment for me. I expect a war game when I buy a game about war from a war game company, unless it really tells me this isn't a war game. Does this on the back even? Not really, but it kind of hints at it. You know, first of all, it's a 2-hour game, complexity 3 out of 10, ages 12 and up. Right there, you're beginning to think, okay, if this is a war game, it's pretty light. But, you know, Napoleon at Waterloo would fit most of that to me. And I would say that's pretty clearly a war game. It simulates. Maybe not great, but it does. But the game system is one of position, feint, and sudden attack that uses cards for movement, battle, and action. You know, that should raise a lot of red flags. For me, I picked it up fairly cheaply, in part because I like Berg's games for the most part. But usually when he tries to do anything too far off the beaten track of what worked for him, you know, when he's getting away from sort of certain key series feels or whatnot, quite often there's a failure. So I'm thinking things like Alexander the Great, the Conquerors, or whatever. That was a pretty bad game. I know Geronimo gets a lot of harshing on it. That's no simulation, but it's a fun game. Medieval, I found, fell really flat, but apparently both Berg and other people seem to enjoy it. So someone's taking some pleasure out of it. I thought it didn't quite do it. And this one's another one in that list of games that, I feel like he's trying to innovate and reach for something. Strangely enough, it is a CDG, though. I mean, straight up. I thought he wasn't doing any CDGs. My opinion was that when I looked at the games that he did after Mark Herman did We the People, it was as though he was trying to catch on to that CDG momentum without actually making a game that was based directly on it. So, yeah, I don't know if Geronimo came out before that. It came right in that era. But some of the others, the Conquerors is definitely up there. Trying to think if there's another one that comes to mind, but I'm having trouble. But these games felt like they were trying to use cards in innovative and fun ways, and they just kind of fell flat for the most part, except Geronimo, which I think is a really cool little game, actually. I don't know why. Watch my video on it, and maybe you'll see there. Maybe I knew why right after I played it. But this one pretty much disappointed. Though I think there are people who could find it. I know there are people who can find fun out of it. I think there are probably better games out there for fun and historicity combined, or historically believable situations developing from the game. And that's about it.